Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, comic book fans the world over. Welcome once again to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a world-renowned, world-famous, world-celebrated, stopped on the street and asked a million questions. Well, you get to ask me the questions today. And what are the questions about? They are about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living, you know it. I write comic books. It's a silly job. I'm so glad I have it. Oh, man, here we go. Philip Russert reached out on Facebook, and he said, how did you get the knowledge of how Americans spoke back then, Hunter Ninja Bear? That's what always impresses me with you. I know you're a history buff, but how does one, whatever. How does one, well, I don't know what you're trying to say here, but I think, how do I capture the dialect of different time periods? Boy, if you could only edit private messages, huh? Yeah, Hunter Ninja Bear, Hunter Ninja Bear in particular had to capture the patois, the common speaking language of people in the early 1800s. And how do you do that? Well, as I mentioned in videos before, people lived regionally. You know, they lived in their county, their town, their valley, their village, and most people didn't travel very far from where they were born. And they talked to people who were just from their region. It's how we get regional accents, how we get regional dialects. But more than that, there was no shared language, really. You could read English in books, obviously. But people don't talk like in books. You know, you read books, but you don't absorb that language and then talk that way. It's not the way our brains work. We use an entirely different part of our brain when we read than when we speak, or that when we write. So anyway, so you're living in some little, podunk village in, or town in Western Pennsylvania or Wyoming, or, wherever. You might even be an immigrant, recent immigrant to the United States. We're talking early 1800s. And you're going to still have the influences of your native land, be it, French, German, Dutch, whatever. And you add to that the isolation of these various communities. Most people were agrarian. Most people, 75% of the population in the United States at that time, lived rural. They did not live in the cities. And once again, there was no shared language beyond books. There was no radio. There was no television. Our language, as radio became more popular, and film and television, our language, the English language, in America, homogenized. So we all roughly speak the same way. We use the same phraseology. We use the same lexicon and vocabulary. Well, early 1800s, this did not exist. You could literally leave your town, go 2 towns over, and everybody talked entirely differently. They had a different meter, different phraseology, different accent. They used different words for things. And I remember when I was a kid traveling with my parents, we would often take road trips in the summer to go back down south, because my dad was a Southerner. And we would leave Philadelphia and drive into, Virginia and North Carolina and places like that. And I'm a Philly kid. So we stop at a restaurant and I order a steak sandwich, and what comes out? A piece of steak between 2 pieces of Wonder Bread. That's a steak sandwich. It's like, this isn't a cheesesteak. Now, cheesesteak they never heard of. Suggesting to put cheesesteak on their version of a steak sandwich was a sacrilege. Now, you can expand this to language. There was no McDonald's version of the English language. There was no shared American idiom. Now, why do I describe all this in such detail? Because when you're trying to imagine how people would have talked in the early 1800s, it's up to your imagination. As long as you don't put in anachronisms, have them speak using words that would have made no sense to people back then, you keep the language to what they would have known. It also helps to have older books, read older books, because lots of words, the word widdershins. Nobody says widdershins anymore. And it's such an awesome word. Widdershins means to run around without purpose. Basically run around in circles, like when you're confused, you don't know what to do, you don't know which door to leave by. You are running widdershins. But English language was loaded with words like that. And it helps to get books like, I have a book called Forgotten English. It helps to get a really, really deep thesaurus. The internet won't help you here. The other thing is, don't be afraid to make words up, to make phraseology up, because we don't know how they talk. Nobody's going to say, hey, you're wrong. They didn't use a word like that. As long as it's not anachronistic, as long as they're not suddenly talking about television, or or MILFs or something that makes no sense in the early 1800s, you can get away with murder on this stuff. Now, in Hunter Ninja Bear, I was aided by the fact that the folks at Phenom, Tom Fanoglio and his brother, gave me this outline for Hunter Ninja Bear, and there was some dialogue sprinkled in it, which I adapted. And for some of the characters, in addition to having them all speak in a way that I thought sounded period, or at least sounded somewhat authentic, I also gave them all each their own separate voices. And there's one character in there whose name I can't recall at the moment. I think his name is Ghost Town. They came up with all these great names. His name is Ghost Town, and he's batshit crazy. And nothing he says makes a whole lot of sense. It only makes sense to him. And he's speaking English, but he needs an interpreter all the time. And a lot of what he says is non sequitur. A lot of what he says is he's talking in parables or allegory or pictures in his head. And I imagine that's the way a lot of people would talk back then. If you ever meet rural people, truly rural people who've grown up in a rural area and never really left their places, you know what I'm talking about. I lived in Pennsylvania. I didn't live that rural. I lived outside of Kennett Square. I had 10 acres, and I hired a landscape guy basically to mow the lawn. And he was a local guy, came from a local family. They'd been there forever. I mean, just to give you an idea, our road was named after a family that owned a dairy farm on our road, and they had been there since 1870. That family had been milking cows since 1870. So when you talk to these people, you kind of got to give them some leeway that they don't talk the way you talk. We're only an hour outside of Philadelphia, but their patois, their manner of speaking, their phrasing, completely different. You have to kind of get used to it. And you have to get used to the fact that they never, at least in this area, their habit was to never answer a direct question with a direct answer. Yeah. And you had to get used to long pauses. These were people, they were farmers, right? They weren't in a hurry for anything. So you had to give them their time. I thought, this is awesome. This is good for a city boy like me to learn from these people, to slow the hell down. It doesn't all have to be rush, running for the bus. Everything's going to take care of itself. Anyway, that's it. There's a lot of freedom there when you're doing dialogue of people in the past, because you can make a lot of it up, and you can inform yourself by reading stuff in period. And there were plenty of memoirs and diaries and all that kind of stuff written so you can get a sense of the language. But for the most part, like most of what I do all day, I'm just making this stuff up. All right. Psionic Q. When the second Black Panther movie was announced, it was the first time I'd ever heard of Namor. I wasn't interested in watching the movie, but I looked up Namor out of curiosity. The first thing that popped in my mind was, oh, this is Marvel's ripoff of Aquaman. But I was surprised when I found out that it was actually the reverse. It's funny because everyone and their mother knows who Aquaman is, even before the movies. Meanwhile, casual comic book readers probably think Namor is a ripoff. So I wanted to ask, does originality matter? Does it only matter when a character is more popular? Does it peeve you that Aquaman is more popular than Namor, despite the latter being the original Yeah, I guess on a fanboy level, I don't like the fact that Aquaman is held in higher esteem, or at least is more of a household name than Namor, the Submariner. Um, and the biggest part of this is because, growing up, we had Aquaman, and then with the Marvel Age, coming to the Marvel Age, they brought Submariner back, and I was like, oh my god, who's this guy? This guy's so awesome. He's such an a-hole. he doesn't give a crap what anybody thinks. This is half human, half fish, testosterone driven being is like the coolest thing in comics. And who the hell's Aquaman anymore? Because Aquaman to me was always a lame character. When I was a kid, I was never interested in Aquaman. He just seemed kind of ridiculous. And to this day, I still think he's ridiculous. But he has the advantage of having been in a movie that, made a whole lot of money, played by a popular actor. Aquaman was on Super Friends for years. And he just has that, the imprimatur, if it were, but he does, Submariner does, predate Aquaman by quite a bit of time, created by Bill Everett in World War II. And, but the Namor's problem is that he vanished for a while when Marvel stopped doing superhero comics, and their attempt to return to them in the early 50s failed. Namor gets thrown on the dustbin of comic book history, and then Aquaman comes out of nowhere and takes his place as the reigning superhero Sea Lord. And it's not until Submariner returns in Fantastic Four years later that guys like me got to expose this character and how freaking awesome he was. And this Black Panther movie is not going to do anything to help, because apparently it's a watered down, diluted, and although Submariner would enjoy being watered down, it's not Namor. It's not Namor. Whatever it is, whatever they decide to do, whatever DEI choice they made in casting, and his accoutrements and whatever, it's a mess. It's a total mess. But yeah, Submariner C, Aquaman no, in my opinion. And popularity. What are you going to do? Popularity wins the day. There's lots of things that people don't know about that there's a more popular version of, and it's like, it's like when you're a fan of a music group and then they become big, and you're like, well, their earlier stuff was better. You don't like the stuff that everybody else likes. It's just a fanboy knee-jerk reaction. But Namor, boom, he's the best. All right, now somewhere. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, you have characters that are derivative, and comics is full of characters that are derivative, and often it's by the same creators. I mean, Fantastic Four is Kirby's Challenges of the Unknown, just recast as superheroes, things like that. And there's always arguments over who created what first. And Marvel and DC and Fawcett beat each other up for years over Captain Marvel versus Superman. Who came first, chicken or the egg? Was Captain Marvel a ripoff of Superman? And they spent so much time in court over this that eventually, Fawcett threw in the towel. They just stopped printing comics. They said, okay, forget this. This isn't even worthwhile. And the problem for Superman was to say that Captain Marvel was an imitator. Was Captain Marvel was very, very, very successful at the newsstand. He rivaled and sometimes exceeded Superman's sales. And so this was a big problem for DC, because they were looking at Captain Marvel ultimately supplanting Superman in the same way that Aquaman supplanted Submariner in the minds of the comic book reading audience. Okay, I think you get a twin spin here. I've kind of messed up all this stuff. Yeah, Cyanic Q, back again. I've been playing some Resident Evil 2 lately, and let's see, where am I? And I wanted to know if you would be ever be interested in writing a comic based on the games. I personally prefer Resident Evil than The Walking Dead. As much as I like Walking Dead, it's more of an apocalyptic melodrama than it is a zombie horror survival story. The zombies could be replaced with anything else and it wouldn't make that much of a difference. Meanwhile, Resident Evil focuses way more on zombies and other horrific bioweapons, which I'm more into. Yeah, I mean, Resident Evil versus Walking Dead. I mean, what Walking Dead became is, just a, misery porn and a crybaby fest. Where I know what you're saying. You want, I want to see zombies getting killed. I want to see, horror suspense situations. I want to see the apocalypse writ large. And yeah, I mean, it's in my wheelhouse. Now I gotta say, I'm a big fan of the Resident Evil movies. And I could already hear you Resident Evil game fans going, boo, Hiss, you're an idiot. You're a Philistine. How could you like those movies? Well, I'm not a gamer. I don't know much about the games. I'd certainly be willing to learn. I don't know much about the games, but I did like the movies a whole lot. I saw all of them. I watched a couple of them a number of times. They're solid popcorn, goofy gonzo action films. And I like it. And, it's kind of, like I said, in my wheelhouse. But to write the game, yeah, and this genre wouldn't be new to me. I've written a zombie novel called Gomers, available on Amazon, available on Kindle and in paperback. And so I've always liked this genre. I was a big fan of all the way back to George Romero, and before that, I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, which is essentially where the zombie action apocalypse thing begins, even though Matheson was writing about vampires. But yeah, I could do it. I would sign up for that. That would be a lot of fun if the money was right and the artist was good. Ian Potash, hi Chuck. I'm interested to hear you mention Henry Silva in relation to the inspiration for Bane, his co-star Richard Boone of the Tall T. How did you feel hearing a classic actor like Silva being to bring one of your characters to life for the animated series? One small quirk is they had him tone down his accent when the show was revised for the new Batman Adventures. Any preference there? Yeah, I mean, when I heard Henry Silva was going to do the voice, I was like, okay, all right, they're going to get the character right. Henry Silva, he could do the accent. He'll sound menacing as hell. This guy had a freaky, scary voice. In addition to the sinister natural appearance. I mean, he was like 2 chromosomes away from being, matinee idol handsome. But there was just something in his features that made you think, oh my God, I don't want to meet this guy in an alley. He wasn't ugly. He just looked evil, just looked dangerous. And of course, he was perfect for to play Bane, to do the voice of Bane. In addition to being a terrific actor. I mean, nobody sold bad guy like Henry Silva could sell bad guy. He had all the chops. And so, yeah, I mean, I was over the moon, super pleased. I mean, they made some great voice choices on that show. And he was one of them. They got some top flight Hollywood talent to do those voices. Pretty amazing. Losing the accent, yeah, I'm not happy about it. I want Bane to be a Hispanic guy. I mean, Danny Trejo voiced him on one of the series. I can't remember which one. And I thought that was cool too. Danny Trejo, perfect voice for Bane. So, Cameron Morgan, what are some of your favorite Chinese and/or Japanese-based comics, books, or films? What are some of the big influences you had for Way of the Rat? Well, I'm going to concentrate on the Way of the Rat influences for this question because there's so many Asian films I like. I could just go on and on and on. I could do a separate podcast just about that stuff. But yeah, Way of the Rat was a comic book series. I did 24 issues for CrossGen back in the day. Majority of them, I believe, by me and Jeff Johnson. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I could not have done this series without Jeff. Jeff is a martial artist, has a keen interest in Asian history, and he really brought it to this. I mean, he brought an authenticity, a believability, in addition to doing some amazing fight sequences in this book. If you ever get a chance, hopefully Marvel will collect it in an omnibus. I think it's certainly worthwhile because it was beautifully drawn throughout. Even when Jeff left, we had some tremendously talented people working on it to follow him. Now, some of the influences of Hong Kong action films, Hong Kong martial arts films were exploding in the mid 80s into the 90s here in the United States. Really hard to get. Used to haunt Laserdisc stores in Chinatown, New York, until they would throw me out. I've said this before, but it's worth sharing again. Got thrown out of one store in Chinatown. I'm going through the Laserdisc, and I asked how much they cost, and the guy said, "These are not for you," and just pointed to the door. I was out of there. But you could buy bootlegs, and eventually Laserdisc became available. Mail order, remember mail order? They'd send you a catalog in the mail. No internet. And Bride with White Hair, big influence. Period fantasy film. And it's got like fairy tale elements to it, but it's also a balls out, martial arts flick as well. And just beautifully photographed, wonderfully acted, wonderfully realized. This was my intro into Asian mythology. And Way of the Rat, has, a great degree of fantasy elements in it. So this was a big influence. Also, Burning Paradise. I've mentioned this film before. It's Ringo Lam, who's a prolific Hong Kong film director. This was his only martial arts film. And it is a corker. It is grim and nasty. It's like a combination of a kung fu movie and a horror film. Legendary Chinese martial arts heroes are taken prisoner and forced into slavery in the dungeons of this temple, of the Red Lotus Temple. And the martial arts stuff is terrific. There's no wire work. It's all for real. The sets are amazing. The villains are loathsome and disgusting, and you can't wait to see them die. And just some terrific action stuff. And it's a film I don't hear talked about a lot. And it's a shame Lam didn't do more of these period martial arts films, but I think this was his statement. This is my ultimate period martial arts film. Big influence for me on Way of the Rat. And I have to add, Jeff Johnson was as big a fan of all this stuff as I was. We were watching tons of Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Hong Kong action films while we were doing Way of the Rat. We kept suggesting them back and forth to each other. I remember we fell in love with the My Wife is a Gangster series. Once Upon a Time in China movies with Jet Li. These were a big influence for, the big cast of hundreds martial arts sequences, the kind of stuff we were doing in Way of the Rat. And again, it's a period martial arts actioner. And this is a terrific series. But largely it was Jackie Chan, and mostly Drunken Master 2. Jackie Chan's last big period martial arts film. Chan was a big influence on the series in the characterization of Boone, because Boone is a thief and he's sort of a serio comic guy. He's like a Jackie Chan character in that he's not always the coolest guy in the world. He's not Jet Li. He's not Donnie Yen. He's Buster Keaton. And Boone would get himself into all these kind of troubles. And I thought that kind of character was better than the steely-eyed martial arts tough guy. That it would be different. We made him a thief instead of a straight-up martial artist. And we gave him a talking monkey companion, which just seemed to fit the tone we were going for of a period martial arts fantasy with a good degree of humor in it. Cameron Morgan again. Did you have an opportunity to pitch for a samurai story with CrossGen? How did Ron Mars get onto writing The Path? The Path was a samurai series. I forget how many issues that ran, by Ron Mars and Bart Sears, with wonderful inks by Mark Pennington. And I didn't know. I found out along with everybody else that Ron was going to be doing this. And I didn't pitch one because I had just gotten to CrossGen and I already had a full plate. They had given me, I was at this time, I was putting together Way of the Rat, and I was also assigned Crux and Sigil. So I had 3 monthlies, and that was kind of all that CrossGen demanded of me was 3 monthlies. I ended up writing a lot more. I wrote specials and miniseries and fill-in issues for other writers. And I think at the end I was writing 4 books every month or more. I can't even remember. Yeah, I was probably doing 5 because I had Sigil, I had Crux, I had Brath, I had Way of the Rat, and then I had El Cazador, which really was the book I was concentrating on most. This is the book I most wanted to do for CrossGen, was a pirate book. I never had a samurai book in mind. I've written samurai stuff in the past, but I didn't have a samurai book in mind for CrossGen. I really thought a pirate book was the next best fit for the company. So that's what I did in secret. I've told that story before, where I created El Cazador without really informing anybody except Steve Epting, the artist, that this is what we were going to be doing, following his run on Crux. I took a hint from Jeff Johnson, who said that one thing he learned in the Army was it was always better to apologize than ask permission. So I took that to the nth degree and created this pirate series at CrossGen. And you know the rest of the story if you've heard these videos. Okay, Mattel Jones. Are you familiar with Black Max? It appeared in the British comic book weekly Thunder back in 1970-71. It looks like the writer Frank Pepper must have been a pulp fan, G8 in particular. This has been reprinted recently in its entirety by Rebellion Books under their Treasury of British Comics line. I had never heard of this series until you told me, and thank goodness you told me. I only wish you told me a little sooner, because it's reprinted in 3 volumes, and the first volume is really expensive. The cheapest I've found it for is $100. So I bought volume 2. I found volume 2 on eBay for under 20, and I'm going to read it. And if I like it, and I think I really will like it, I'm gonna order the other 2 volumes. But it sounded really interesting in your email, and then it got real interesting when I looked it up, and it's drawn by Alfonso Font. Alfonso Font is one of my favorite comic book artists of all time, and he's an Argentine. And the Argentines in this period, up until the Falklands War, a lot of the British weeklies were drawn by artists from Argentina. And then they all lost their jobs when the Falklands War began, or as the Argentines referred to it, the Malvinas Islands. But yeah, I mean, the G8 influence is pretty darn obvious. Here you got a giant bat attacking a tri-wing Fokker plane, and yeah, G8 had the Batstaffel that continuously played G8 and his battle aces back in the old pulp days. So this Frank Pepper guy was certainly familiar with G8. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the volume coming and reading it, probably review it on what you're reading. But I really shout out, thank you for recommending this. I had no idea that these have been reprinted. Nick Lenz, I've been reviewing your work on Detective Comics, Batman, Nightwing, Robin, Green Arrow, Punisher, Mark Spector, Moon Knight, Van Helsing, and Robin Hood for my YouTube channel. I'll have to check that out. I have a question about the specials that Punisher had for his first ongoing series, Back to School, Holiday, and Summer. Who came up with these? I know you wrote stories for 2 of these specials. Yeah. Hold on. That was Don Daley. Don Daley came up with these ideas for the Punisher Christmas special, the Punisher holiday special, you know, things like that. And a lot of people thought they were in poor taste, which just encouraged Don to do more of them. And, you know, obviously post-Columbine, the Punisher Back to School special would be an extremely poor taste. But, you know, he would come up with these things, and it was largely to give tryouts to new artists and, in some cases, new writers. Don produced an astounding amount, or assigned an astounding amount of Punisher material. There are rumors that when Don was fired, there was a $500,000 in Punisher inventory in his flat files that had not been yet published. And I think that's exaggerated, but there was a lot. And I know there was a lot because there was a lot of stuff I did, entire graphic novels. I recently found out there's a whole graphic novel by Mike Baron that was never published. There was mini-series and specials and one-shots. I know a number of Punisher short stories I did that were drawn and never published. Why Marvel wouldn't go back and maybe just print them in black and white? Just put out a big old paperback of unpublished Punisher stories. Why wouldn't you do that? They didn't even sell the stuff overseas, which seemed to be low-hanging fruit to me. But yeah, Don is the genius behind the Punisher specials, and Marvel didn't discourage him because they created new number ones. And we all know retailers love new number ones, so at least the first one would sell really big. This Punisher holiday special, I remember I've told this story before, but all of you don't watch all the videos. But this Punisher holiday special, I have fond memories of because I was visiting Flint Henry at his studio, and Don tracked me down there. He called at home, and my wife said, "Well, he's visiting Flint." And Don's like, "Well, give me that number." And Don calls Flint, and Flint puts me on the phone, and Don says, "I got an artist here. His wife just had a baby, and he needs work. I want you to write a story set in the wintertime." And I'm like, "Okay. I can, tomorrow I'll take a look, and how many pages?" And Don says, no, he needs work right now. His wife just had a baby. I want to give him work right now. Write me a story right now. I'm like over the phone? He says, yeah. And I said, look, call me back in 15 minutes, and I'll give you the first 3 pages. And then I'll write the rest when I get home. I'll write it before the week's over. But this will get him started. And so I sat down with a legal pad at Flint's kitchen table and wrote the first 3 pages of this holiday special sniper story. And Don called back in 15 minutes on the dot, and I read him the pages. And then he assigned it to the artist, who took it home and drew a fantastic story, and it was Dale Eaglesham. And if I'm not mistaken, it might have been Dale's first work for Marvel. So there you go. Crazy. But that's the way Don worked, man. He was loosey-goosey. You never knew what was going to happen. You never knew when the phone rang and it was Don Daley what the hell he was going to tell you. He might want to tell you about a great restaurant he just went to, or a terrific movie he saw, or assign you something. And, I love the Punisher, so I said yes every time. Okay, one more thing. I didn't do the movie suggestions last week, and I heard from a lot of you, hey, where are my movie suggestions? So let's finish up 1979. We're going to finish out the 70s today. It's a movie called Chilly Scenes of Winter, directed by Joan Micklin Silver. It was based on a novel by Ann Beattie, who was a frequent writer for the National Lampoon. And Chilly Scenes of Winter sounds like an Ingmar Bergman film, and it could have been an Ingmar Bergman film, except it's pretty funny too. It's the anti-romantic comedy. This takes the rom-com and stands it on its head. John Hurd he works in an office, and he's infatuated with Mary Beth Hurt, and he can't get her out of his mind, and he just wants the two of them to be together, but she's with another guy. I don't know if she's living with him or married. I haven't watched the movie recently, but she's in a relationship, and she has no really interest in breaking it up. But Hurd is just so freaking insistent. He's self-centered and abrasive and spacey and a bit of an overgrown child. And that's the key to this whole movie, is that, I've often said, and people have asked about, romance and stories and everything else, that for a romance in a movie or any kind of story to work, we have to fall in love with the two people first, and then want them to be together because we love them so much. We want both of them to be happy, and the only way they can possibly be happy is to be together, and we want that for them. And this is an anti-romantic comedy because we kind of fall in love with Mary Beth Hurt, but we really don't fall in love with John Hurd. We're like through the whole movie thinking, keep away from her. You know, if you could have like pulled her aside and said, "Look, you gotta get a restraining order. You gotta get this guy out of your life, right? You gotta send some of your brothers over to beat the crap out of him, and keep him away from you." And so that's what makes it the anti-romantic comedy. These two do not belong together. And I think that's the whole point of the story. It's certainly closer to real life than the typical Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan movie. And it's one of the reasons I like it. And it's got some really funny moments. And Hurd is terrific in it. As a guy we can all relate to. The guy shooting for a girl is way out of his league. And he really should know better than to inflict himself on her. Next one is Cuba. This is a Richard Lester directed film, and it takes place in Cuba at the cusp of the Fidel Castro revolution to turn the island communist. And it's Sean Connery is a British mercenary hired to train Batista's army. Batista was the dictator who ran Cuba prior to Fidel. And he was such a cruel guy, and he was so mean, and he was so nasty. And the Cubans today would have him back in a heartbeat because he was nowhere near as bad as the Castro brothers would turn out to be. In any case, I editorialize. It's kind of a Casablanca story in that he runs into Brooke Adams, an old flame of his, and she's married to kind of like Chilly Scenes of Winter. She's married to an abusive plantation owner. And Connery's like, you got to get out of here because this place is going to hell. And I can get you out of here and we can be together and all the rest of it. And this is one where you very much want the two of them to be together. You very much like them and you realize they can only be happy with each other. And possibly even, Brooke Adams' life is in danger if she keeps hanging around Havana too much. It's Richard Lester. It's a typical Richard Lester film. He makes a lot of effort to bring you right into this world, right into this period, right into the events. And like most Richard Lester movies, there's a number of comic asides and little bits of business going on in the background. When it comes to portraying the Batista regime, which is embodied by Martin Balsam in this film, playing a Cuban general, he uses a lot of satiric elements to bring out how oppressive the Batista regime was and how dangerous Cuba was in this period. But it's a cool film, and it's mostly forgotten today. It's probably on a streaming service somewhere. Next one, we're going to move to 1980 with Tom Horn. This is the last of the two movies that Steve McQueen made before he died way too soon. This is an awesome Western, one of my favorite Westerns, and it tells the true story of the final years of Tom Horn. Tom Horn was a Army scout, buffalo hunter, jack of all trades in the Old West. He most famously rode into Geronimo's camp and talked him into surrendering. That took a pair of cojones the size of Arizona, but Horn did it, and he had this. He was also a Rough Rider. He was there with Teddy Roosevelt when they stormed San Juan Hill. So this guy saw it all, did it all. And in his last days, he was a regulator for a cattle association. And what a regulator did was he went around and he killed rustlers. Now, this was not an official position. And in this movie especially, they portray how the Cattlemen's Association had total deniability about, we didn't hire him. There's no paper signed. There's no nothing. It's like, these are the people we need dead. You're going to go out and kill them. And Horn is accused of murdering a young boy. And it's never made clear in the movie whether he did it or not. We have a sense that he was framed because he was becoming an embarrassment to the Cattlemen's Association because he was leaving so many dead rustlers out there on the prairie that they kind of like, okay, we're done with this guy. And this is an old story where, you especially in Westerns, where we hired you to do a job, but you're doing it too damn good. And we got no way out of this except to hang you. And Horn was put on trial. And he famously did not defend himself. He had no lawyer, and his only defense was, "Hey, I'm Tom Horn. Damn it! If you don't just take me at my word, I didn't do it. Well, I got nothing else to say." And famously, Tom Horn was so beloved in the West that no man would hang him. And so they had to bring in a hangman who used a device it was a timed device that would hang you. So no one was actually pulling the lever. It dealt with water and gravity. It was a really complex Rube Goldberg type device. McQueen is terrific in the role. It's super authentic Western. Linda Evans is in the cast, Richard Farnsworth, and just a really, really good, if dour and somewhat bleak Western. And I really dug it. It was, I believe, written, but I know directed by Tom Grease, who is most famous for doing the Rat Patrol, creating the Rat Patrol TV series. But it's a good one. My only regret, and I probably wouldn't have done this either if I was making the movie, because you don't know how it's going to come off. When Tom Horn was standing on the gallows waiting for the trap to, drop beneath him, he sang the choir hymn, "Life is Like a Mountain Railroad," to a quiet audience of hundreds who had shown up to see him hang and basically celebrate his life before he was lynched. So, but I can see where the filmmakers are probably, we don't know how that's going to play with modern audiences. But yeah, excellent movie. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's probably streaming somewhere. Okay, Bruno Bookstore. BrunoBookstore at gmail.com, BrunoBookstore at gmail.com if you want to contact me, if you have questions you would want to ask, and all the rest. So, but no, I was going to say before I go, but I'll save that for next time. Hey, how's that for a teaser? It's a terrible teaser. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking, subscribing. Notice I didn't bother you about subscribing this time because I really don't even care anymore. And I will see all of you down the road.